by talking about the neurological age gap.
That is completely new, as you explain it. It completely makes sense. Empathy, that is a foundation.
What have we done, and was the evolution not too fast for our brains? It's though the left brain is just so dominant. The brains are starting to look different. Lots of studies are coming out on the lack of empathy these days amongst kids. Children are in not great mental health at the moment. There are so many issues with.
Christien, you have written over 22 books, of which most of them are youth novels.
Every author has a story behind the stories.
Okay. Way back in 2007, I was a school speech therapist. A friend of mine phones and says, listen, I've booked myself in for a writer's course. Don't you want to come with me? I've just written about 50 speech therapy reports. I really don't feel like writing anymore. But I've always been telling stories to kids. It started a long time ago when I was little. I was a scaredy cat. I was so scared at night. So I had a younger feisty sister, and she allowed me to crawl into bed with her, but I had to tell her a story. That was my ticket into her bed. So every night I told her a story, and it became like a soap. That was like my training steps for telling stories. Anyway, so that same year, in that school holiday, July of 2007, we go on our very first camping trip. It became a nightmare of note. Anything that could go wrong went wrong. The hyena stole our braai meat as we were making our fire there. The hyena went with our cooler box. So that was the sort of the theme of our holiday. Things went frightfully wrong. But there were all these youngsters on the camp, and I enjoyed them, high school children. There was a lovely buzz amongst the kids. So getting back, I hardly unpacked the car, and I had to leave on this writing course with my friend. But what I didn't know, it was a love story, a romance writing course. And I was terrified they might force us to take this love story to its full conclusion, and I would end up here with some sordid scene in my story that I didn't feel like writing. So I chose the kids on our camping trip, the high school kids, as my characters, and everything that went wrong on our camp, and how this main character, the girl, hated every moment. And then after the course leader called me and said, listen, take this home and finish it. This is a youth novel. What? So anyway, about 9 months later, I get an email, how is your manuscript coming? I'd all but forgotten about it. It was finally published. And this is this one, the top one, condensed milk. A bush cappuccino, anyway. So after that, it was a huge success. I couldn't believe it. They asked me to do a follow-up, and I wrote the next one, which is Koshuis coffee, which is boarding school coffee. So every year I wrote another one until we got to number 12. So they're still popular reads. So that was how I landed in writing. And then while I was still writing this series, I started feeling like a one-trick pony. Is that all I can do now that I've published a few? Can't I write something else as well? And that's just about the time in my life when this little boy called Alexander came into my life. And I was working with this child who was one of the first autistic kids that I worked with, highly functioning autistic child, but so totally misunderstood, and amazing, interesting child. So
it's a true story.
So, well, it's totally fictionalized, but I used his characters.
Umper Einstein.
Yes, Umper Einstein, meaning almost Einstein. And that's Misha, the 5-year-old, misunderstood, impossible child, pothead, whatever they called him, but in the end this child rescues their science project, this insight.
What are you writing at the moment?
At the moment I'm writing absolutely zero, but these are the last two I wrote. And this one is about old Stoffel.
Oh,
and
is this Stoffel?
This is Stoffel.
Stoffel the hero.
It was commissioned as a reader for grade 6 and 7, and it's a story about a child who refuses to read in school, and what he doesn't tell anybody is that he stutters. So he gets sent to the SPCA, the dog shelter of their town, with all the kids of the aid class that can't read, to go and read to dogs, because his teacher then decides maybe this child has a reading difficulty. Maybe he can't read, and that's why he has this attitude, not knowing that he stutters. So he gets given this scruffy dog, and it's this friendship, and then the two of them run away. They fall down a manhole, and then it's this whole rescue operation. But in that manhole with the dog, this child eventually gets to the point where he says, does it matter if I stutter? If I'm just alive, wouldn't that be first prize? Who cares? And then it's the story of this child remembering his father's words, saying, just pretend that everybody you're looking at is a different kind of dog. Give them a dog face and see how your fear of speaking in front of people disappears. And that's the last picture in the book, is of him reading aloud in front of the class and everybody having a different dog face.
I love that. New tricks for old dog.
I remember myself, one of my first, most vivid memories were the story time. And I read it from your book, the importance of just simple story. It is not about story. It is so much more.
It's so much more. There are people doing PhDs on what you're now calling story time, calling it linguistic theory, but it's story time. And it boils down to that age-old wisdom of a mother talking to a child in that motherese, that language with a higher pitch. The implication of motherese is that is a mother's instinctive pitch for what that child can hear at that stage of its life. And as the child's hearing changes, because initially the child can't hear all the frequencies, they can't hear the lower frequencies that well, so the mother's voice comes down. When the child's about 6 months, she talks in a different voice than when the child was newborn. And then through the child's life, as she's telling stories, she's also adjusting her pitch. And that has huge scientific relevance.
Fascinating.
And that is the ideal way of teaching a child language, teaching a child interpersonal relationships, listening skills. Now, yesterday in my talk, I cited some statistics. For South Africa, the sad statistic is that only 20% of children in our grade 1 at present has ever heard a story told to them at home. And the interesting thing is, studies show that from birth to about 6-7 years, our brains have that fantastic plasticity where you can form a picture in your brain from a word that you've heard. And that is what storytelling is. Mom tells a story. You've never seen a dragon, or you've never seen a ghost, or you've never seen fairy before. But if your mother tells you the story about the fairy, your brain makes a picture. And they've done MRI scans of kids listening to a story, but they don't have any pictures in front of them. And you'll see how the auditory side of the brain lights up, and then immediately the visual area starts to light up as the child makes a picture. And that is fantasy, just to hear and to make a fantastic image. So every child's image will be different, but they make an image. Now, the sad thing is, if you start grade 1 and you have not developed that fitness in your brain, the process is slower. You need much more repetition. The international reading studies show that 80% of our grade 4s, after 4 years at school, read without comprehension. They can read the letters and the words, but the comprehension isn't there. So it all comes from the mother's lap. So they say reading starts on a mother's lap, and that's the honest truth.
Specifically looking at South Africa, there is such a need for children's books for ethnic languages.
Yes. What they've now started doing is to publish books with pictures where it's sort of logic what the story would be like, because to send a picture book or a storybook home for many of those kids would be a waste of time, as many of the parents are illiterate. But if there's a picture that sort of tells the story, anybody could retell it to a child. So this is one of the things they're trying, and it seems to be working. And some of the outreaches that I'm involved in follows this plan as well. There's a group of colored people in Cape Town with the name of Friends of Afrikaans, and they go into the rural areas And I've often gone with them all over the country. We find these small pockets of people, and there are always these older ladies in the community looking after scores of kids. Most of them are totally illiterate, but are they good storytellers? And they only need to be told that your voice is going to save these kids. Your voice is going to turn them into readers one day, but we have to do story time every day. You can tell your own stories, or you can use these books with the pictures and let them listen to you. And that will lead eventually to reading, because it would fascinate them, or it does fascinate them, that these black squiggles will actually one day tell a story. It's just squiggles now, but it's going to tell a story. So if everybody in South Africa could become involved in some kind of an outreach where we get the children being cared for by goggles all over the country to just tell them stories, and not to park them in front of a TV, we will go a long, long way in alleviating our reading crisis. Because unfortunately, with the moment you switch on a screen, those kids don't always know what the soundtrack is all about. And they're not really learning the language by watching a program that's visual. They're watching the movements, the actions, and all these little bells and whistles that go on all the time. But it's not training their brain for reading. So that is something that parents, with all the best intention of the world, would save and save and save to get the smartphone, to get the Xbox. And it's not helping the child one iota for schoolwork. If you're a good reader, you by all means have the screen as your dessert. You can have it. Once you've activated that right brain, then there's good interaction between left and right. But the thing of a screen, it takes the adult out of the picture. A lot of the time, a screen is just such a lifesaver for parents, and at least the child is safe. Physically, the child is safe. What's happening under the surface, that's not so safe. The dopamine hits you get with all those little hidden sounds and blasts and activities, it's just extremely, extremely addictive. So parents would just have to work so much harder to become the antidote to the screen. Not that I say screens are evil, but the red lights are up there. Also, a very interesting theory behind that. When one watches a screen, you either play a game or you just watch a movie, you involve your left brain. And your left brain is for visual concentration, and it's for quick decision making. And kids playing these games where they have fast coordination is brilliant for their left brain. But there's something that doesn't happen, and that is that their right brain is excluded. Their right brain is not active when you're working with a screen or just watching a movie, especially if you don't understand the soundtrack. In the right brain is your focus and attention. There's your listening skills. There's your fantasy. And there's your empathy. Now, kids who sit with a screen all day long, and lots of studies are coming out on the lack of empathy these days amongst kids, they do not acquire empathy spontaneously. If anybody changes the channel or take the remote away, their whole world comes tumbling down. They find it difficult to switch from there to doing something else. And they're even talking about a phenomenon called digital dementia. Kids at ages about 11, 12, 13 who become so addicted to the different kinds of screens that they actually stop functioning age appropriately. They don't want to wash, they don't want to eat, they're not interested in coming to sit at the table. They just want to keep on playing. They play overnight, so their sleeping patterns get disturbed, etc., etc. And the way they treat these kids, if they are admitted to clinics, is by giving them an animal to look after to enhance that empathy thing. They are forced to read paper books to get into the right brain to start fantasizing again. They are forced to make small talk to each other, because that's another function they lose, to just talk for being polite and social. Children are not great mental health at the moment. There are so many issues with anxiety, and I think because they are so overstimulated with screens, and it's difficult to deal with mental health issues, far more difficult than dealing with broken bones. And I think this is going to be one of the big issues in the years going forward. what have we done, and was the evolution not too fast for our brains? We went from 0 screens to wall-to-wall screens within 20 years. By talking about the neurological age gap, that brain scans show that a child born before 1980, or if that's an adult now, the brain looks different than somebody born after 2010. The brains are starting to look different. The pathways, the myelinization of the brain. But just while we're talking about this, autistic children on the spectrum are absolutely drawn to screens from an early age. They make a better connection with screens than with a human face, especially the lower you are on the spectrum. So I think that's why there are so many applications for them to use linguistically, what they call augmented communication apps and things that they can use to point out what they need or what they want. And therefore I applauded. Before, those kids just didn't have anything. If they couldn't talk, they couldn't talk. Now at least there's that they sometimes do very well with, and it sometimes acts as a little bridge towards vocalization, towards speech.
If you are, hypothetically, you were to write your autobiography, where would you start?
My goodness, I've never given that any thought, but I know that my autobiography would probably be called, what I said, my epitaph will one day be, "Here lies a reluctant cook." Pretty much chronologically, just remembering what it was like growing up in a family of 5 in the drought in Bloemfontein, where all of us, the 7 of us, had to share a bath, a few inches of water, and we started with the grown-ups, then the teenagers, and my sister and I were the little ones that had to bath last. And I can remember having a bath in like dirty water. And how wonderful it was when, by the time the drought was broken, and we could fill a bath with suds and soap and just have a ball. And that joy of something so mundane as a bath. And maybe that's one of the reasons why having a bath every day to me is the highlight of my days, to have a bath all to myself. I think everybody has that kind of childhood memory that they associate with true luxury. True luxury is having your own bath. Just you in that bath, up to your neck. Yeah, travel my life again and thinking good or bad decisions were made, and whether it was a great decision or not, you sort of just live it until it fits you. Might not be what the doctor ordered, but you just try on those shoes and you walk them until they don't hurt anymore.
Thank you, Christien. It's been an absolute honor having this conversation with you.
And it's just my pleasure. Thank you.